So not long ago on this channel, we did a video about the US Festival, specifically about Van Halen's involvement there. And as I was making that video and reading some stuff about it, it occurred to me, I don't think we had ever done a video on this channel about Triumph. Triumph, of course, played the US Festival, which is very strange for me, because if you would have known me back in the 1980s when I was really into all this stuff, and I was a huge fan of Triumph. Matter of fact, once I discovered them, and I'm going to talk about that here in a second, I went back and I bought every single thing they ever put out. And then some. I think I got a couple of different variations of some of their early albums, like different covers and things. I loved Rick Emmett as a personality. I loved his voice. I loved his guitar playing. The music, I was so into Triumph. I loved them so much. And the first time that I think I really was introduced to them and realized who they was the album Never Surrender. I think what had happened is I heard the song Never Surrender on the radio, and I think that's what it was. And I thought, what is this? And it was so cool. Maybe a friend put it on a mixtape or something. I can't remember, but I heard the song Never Surrender. And I loved it so much that I had to go buy the album. So I went and bought this album, Never Surrender, and I loved the record. I specifically Rick Emmett. I loved his voice. I thought he was so spectacular. And I was never as big a fan of Gilmore's voice, but Rick Emmett anyway, he was kind of like my hero for a while. I just thought, and he was such a great guitar player. And this album was so great. And you all know the kind of I don't know if it's a joke, but it's a little thing about, so what's a 3-piece Canadian band where the bass player also plays the keyboards and has really long brown hair. The lead vocals are really, really high pitched, has a great drummer and a virtuoso guitar player. And, you think you're saying Rush, but it's actually Triumph, right? I mean, because they were kind of similar in a few ways that way, but they were so awesome. And so I went and bought this album, and then as I started going back and buying the other stuff, then you realize you'd actually heard a whole bunch of their things in the earlier albums. Again, I was becoming aware of music back in their, 81, 82, when I was like 12 years old or so. And so as I was discovering these things, you buy this, and then you go back and you buy the album right before this one, which is Allied Forces, and you hear the song Fight the Good Fight, which is one of the most brutal, like, get you up off your feet, motivational songs you'll ever hear. It's so awesome. And then that album also has a song Magic Power, which is just amazing, right? And then you keep going back into their catalog, and they had so much great stuff. But on this album in particular, Never Surrender was incredible. And then the other song that was so great on here that I loved was A World of Fantasy. That one had a real kind of almost a Styx flavor to it. Anyway, I loved this album, and I loved Triumph so much. And so what I wanted to share with you here today is I found 2 newspaper reviews about this album. And if you liked Triumph and you liked this album, I want to get your feedback on what you think of these, if you relate to it. Because although I loved this album, I don't think this one was as good as Allied Forces, for example. And then I bought the album after this one. I can't remember what it was called. I didn't like it quite as much. I thought they really peaked around that Allied Forces Never Surrender period. That's when they were just doing this. They were so great. And they were different too, because I remember when they were playing at the US Festival, and you look at all the bands that were also playing on the Heavy Metal Day, and Triumph just wasn't really like them. Almost in a similar way that Rush wasn't like other bands, because you hear stories about Rush, and the guys in Kiss will talk about them. Like after the show, they're just in their hotel room, just chilling out and not out living the rock star life. They were very just not like that. They were a little more conservative in that way, where they would just kind of be normal people. out on the road. And Triumph, similarly, their music, when you had all these other bands at the US Festival that it was just party and crazy and on, and then especially Motley Crue, where at that point, Shout at the Devil, I think they hadn't quite put it out yet, but they were starting to play some of that stuff, and it's all this really dark and heavy, and then Triumph is this very kind of uplifting, positive stuff. I think even in they even have these little Christian biblical. They weren't a Christian band, but they'd have these little references about what's the one? The good book says it's better to give than to receive. I do my best to do my part. I think that's in Fight the Good Fight. Anyway, but they have things like that where it's this kind of uplifting music, very positive energy, all wrapped up in this kind of hard rock packaging. And so I loved Triumph. So again, if you liked them, I think you'll find this stuff interesting listening to this. And so this first one's from the Mississauga News, and it's from February 16th, 1983, page 37. And this guy's review, it says more than heavy metal. And it says Triumph, never surrender. Mississauga-based Triumph is not just another heavy metal band as many people believe. Sure, they have the head-bashing heavy metal songs like Too Much Thinking, The Writing on the Wall, and the party song When the Lights Go Down, as well as AOR tunes like All the Way, a heavy metal song with a strong melody line and the harmonies and flowing melody of A World of Fantasy. That was the one I mentioned just a second ago. Rick Emmett once said that the Progressions of Power album was too heavy for AM radio, and the previous Just a Game was too harmonic. Allied Forces and Never Surrender combine the best of both. On the mellower side of things, you have an A minor prelude, a short acoustical guitar piece, a classically influenced overture, and the epilogue with an electric blues guitar at the forefront and an acoustic guitar with a synthesizer in the background. So by the way, those things were so cool because that a minor prelude, it was a little bit like when Randy Rhoads put D on that album, because it was just him with a little acoustic guitar piece that he'd written. And similarly, Rick Emmett was such a great guitar player. He did this little minor prelude, and it was this little classical guitar piece, and it was great. I mean, you listen to it, and it was interesting because for a lot of us who were into heavy metal, because the guitar players in some of those bands were these virtuoso players, whether we liked it or not, were being introduced to kind of highbrow music in a way. I mean, even Malmsteen, when you listen to him, you realize this guy's a really truly classically trained musician. And even though this is heavy metal music, you're being exposed to a different side of the world of music that you don't realize you're being exposed to. And in Triumph's case, you have that beautiful little classical piece that he plays. I think that one's on side A. Yeah, a minor prelude is on side A. And then the thing that he just talked about, epilogue, which is the last song on side B, is this cool little blues piece. And while you're being surrounded by this really heavy music, they intersperse these cool little things that just kind of exposed some of us that were loving heavy metal music to these other styles. It was kind of cool. Okay, the most impressive tunes on the album are the title track and Battle Cry. I didn't love Battle Cry, to be honest, which was originally slated to be the title track. Battle Cry, a blues rock tune, is similar in many ways to Led Zeppelin's approach to heavy metal. By the way, what do you think of that assessment? I don't know that, I don't see that, but maybe somebody else watching this that will get that. Triumph's use of synthesizers is most predominant on Never Surrender, with many melody changes within the song, from the verse melody to the chorus melody to the bass and guitar solos, then back again. Yeah, Never Surrender was such a great song, and it had this kind of really cool rhythm, and yeah, it was awesome. The disc has clean production work on it, which was co-produced by Triumph and David Thoner, whose credits include work with AC/DC, Billy Squier, and Jay Giles, and was recorded right here in Mississauga at Triumph's own Metalworks studio, the first 48-track studio in Canada. And that's actually pretty interesting. I don't know exactly how they did it, but just from a technical standpoint, and maybe somebody out there that knows this better than I do could answer this question, but a lot of times when most popular music was recorded on what's called a 2-inch tape, and it's a tape that's actually 2 inches thick, and on those tapes you could record 24 tracks. And then what a lot of studios would do back then, if 24 wasn't enough, they would get two machines. They would sync them up with something called SMPTE timecode, and then that would enable you theoretically to get 48 tracks. You double the 24. And then these two tape machines. I actually worked in a studio where I don't know if we did two 2-inch or if it was two 1-inch to do 16 twice, which gives you 32. I can't remember. But anyway, when they say that, the first 48-track studio in Canada, today we don't have limitations like that because it's all digital and you can have literally hundreds of tracks if you want to. But this was a big deal back then. Okay, the little techie stuff there. Okay, here's the next review, and you see a picture there of the guys in the band. And this one says, "Never Surrender, no major triumph." So this guy didn't didn't think as much of it. And so I'm going to share this one with you now. Triumph's Never Surrender has its merits, but the album is not exactly a conquest. Triumph is on tour following the recent release of Never Surrender, the group's sixth album, which succeeds the 1981 release of Allied Forces. The group will appear in concert at 8 p.m. Wednesday at the Ector County Coliseum with Foghat. Never Surrender is obviously a theme package, but the message the 8-year-old band is trying to communicate is not clear. The record reflects a jaded, sometimes bitter attitude towards presumably social ills such as apathy, lies, and irresponsibility. The vices are mentioned incoherently. Never Surrender advocates hanging in there and is peppered with lines such as "stand up and be counted," "contemplate the madness before the deed is done," "so take your shot, give it all you can," and of course, "Never Surrender." The title song, Never Surrender, seems to embody what the album is trying to say, but it never specifically reveals what listeners are not supposed to surrender to. Choose your own conflict. Never Surrender and A World of Fantasy are two of the best singles from the album. That's what I was mentioning just a second ago, and not because I'm I would know anything more than somebody else would. It just, when you listen to the album, it's it's one of those albums where it's just obvious, where these songs are just so excellent that the other ones just don't really compare. It's a little bit like, and I compared The World of Fantasy to Styx. When you go back and listen to Styx, that's how I interpret a lot of their albums. You can pick almost any Styx album, and there's just going to be two songs on there that are just obviously great, and then the rest of them are pretty good. But on most of the Styx albums, you're going to find two that are just like, whoa, that's a great song, and then the rest of them are, yeah, that's pretty good. So anyway, I felt a little bit like that's the way this album was. Best singles from the album, getting a lot of deserved airplay. The songs emphasize the creativity of Triumph as musicians and vocalists. The rollicking When the Lights Go Down also is noteworthy. Triumph's finer moments, however, don't negate the bad. Never Surrender, 6 minutes and 40 seconds long, and A World of Fantasy, about 5 minutes, would be improved by a bit of trimming. The jerky flow of Battle Cry, or dreary song written poorly, runs almost 5 minutes. All the Way is better and shorter than Battle Cry, but is certainly not memorable. Triumph's album is loaded with gimmicks to spice up songs and the album package as a whole. In Too Much Thinking, as opposed presumably to Not Enough Action, a montage of new casts full of depressing news developments briefly and effectively opens and closes the song. Yeah, Too Much Thinking, I don't know. And I think that one was also sung by Gilmore. And like I said, it's a little bit like Grand Funk. I really, really loved Mark Farner as a singer and just wasn't so much into Don Brewer. Although Don Brewer probably sang one of their biggest hits. He's the one that sang "We're an American Band." But anyway, that's a whole another story. So, but "Too Much Thinking," I believe, was as I recall, that was a Gilmore song. The 3 brief instrumental pieces are interspersed between songs. Overture procession prepares with victorious tones for the song "Never Surrender." The melodic strains of a minor prelude are an agreeable contrast to the flowing violence of "All the Way." And then epilogue resolution, however, which follows "Writing on the Wall" and ends the LP, is a bluesy piece that is more morbid and discomforting than it is relaxing. I don't know where that comes from. It's just a little blues piece, and I don't know. I think it's kind of cool. The triumphant tone of "Writing on the Wall" and the majority of the album does not prepare the listener for the inappropriate and contradictory ending of epilogue resolution. But as the supposed cohesiveness of the rest of the album is confusing, at least the ending is consistent. It's kind of funny. Okay, anyway, I'd really love to hear what you think about those reviews. If you were into Triumph, if you remember these songs, if you had this album sold pretty well, so there's a lot of people out there that did, what you think of this review. What did you think of this album? What did you think of this album as compared to the previous albums? You know, again, Allied Forces was the one right before this one, and that one was really hard to beat. You know, when you have a song like "Fight the Good Fight," which was probably had to be their pinnacle piece of music as far as just great songs, that maybe the best song they ever did, really. Anyway, I used to love Triumph so much. I was so into them. So I had to eventually do a video about them on this channel. Hey, please, I'd love to get your comments on this stuff. Please follow the channel, like the video, leave your comments. If you know other people that were into this stuff, please share the video with them. And as always with that, have yourself a fantastic day.